Hello and a warm welcome to our special report. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll convey the sense to you in English, but it's all about the Hindi language, which over the years has undergone many changes. The Hindi which you and I speak is different from the one which is used for official communication. Many times, languages like English have tried to dominate the Hindi language, and consequently, there has been an attempt to politicize the language. In this episode of our special report, let's analyze Hindi as a language, its present status and its future.
अगर हम अपनी जात को, कास्ट को आगे रखें मुल्क के, अगर हम अपनी भाषा को आगे रखें मुल्क के, तो हम तबाह हो जाएंगे और मुल्क तबाह होगा.
We will give priority for the promotion of Hindi in all the usages in various departments and in public life because it's our official language.
Hindi can be a language for some of the states in this country.
राजभाषा को सम्मान होना चाहिए और राजभाषा के सम्मान का कतई अर्थ नहीं है कि जो क्षेत्रीय भाषाएं हैं या जो अंग्रेजी है उसका अपमान.
हमारा मुल्क इतना बड़ा है, आप एक मजहब, एक ज़बान, एक तरह जो है लोगों पे ठोस नहीं सकते हो.
Controversy which is going around that the government of India is imposing Hindi on all the states of India. This is totally wrong. This is totally unwarranted.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's maiden speech at the Bhutanese Parliament. The two-day Bhutan visit focused on mutual trade and development. But one of the biggest stories in India was Modi's use of language. Modi addressed the Bhutanese Parliament in Hindi.
ये मेरे लिए सौभाग्य की बात है कि आज मुझे बहुत छोटी उम्र वाले भारत के मित्र देश की संसद के संयुक्त अधिवेशन को संबोधित करने का सौभाग्य मिला है.
In doing so, Modi reminded everyone that Hindi is the medium he's going to adopt even in international conversations, and at the same time distinguishing himself from other Indian leaders since independence who've almost always used English on the international stage. But while Modi was concluding his Bhutan trip, reports circulated that Home Minister's office had instructed government officers to favor Hindi in social media communication. This prompted charges of Hindi chauvinism from India's non-Hindi regions and jokes about Hindi tweeters buying dictionaries to decode the government's formal Hindi. Government contained the storm in Hindi teacup by saying the directive was not meant for the non-Hindi speaking states.
We will give priority for the promotion of Hindi in all the usages in various departments and in public life because it's our official language. It doesn't mean that we are going to discourage the use of the regional language.
Few weeks later, Prime Minister dispelled the notion by coming in a new avatar altogether. At the PSLV satellite launch at Sriharikota, Modi's English became the talking point for the media, as that perhaps was his first public address in English.
We must do more. ये दिल मांगे more. India's space program is a perfect example of scale, speed and skill.
And almost a month later, the much-hyped BRICS summit, where he chose to communicate on the diplomatic high table in English, dispelling the notion that it's English as well, which is his priority. Despite all the measures attempted by the Modi government, protests centering around Hindi have not died down.
This time, aspirants of Civil Services Preliminary Examination demanding scrapping of Paper 2 of CSAT, that is Civil Services Aptitude Test, on the grounds that it is biased against Hindi and the students coming from the vernacular and rural background. Three-member Arvind Verma committee will submit its report to solve the UPSC crisis soon, but the larger questions on Hindi still remain, especially the technical and practical aspects of the Hindi language. Rajya Sabha TV has used this opportunity to delve into the strengths, weaknesses and challenges faced by Hindi as a language.
Let's now take you back to the good old days when Hindi was debated in the Constituent Assembly. It was a heated argument, all for a status.
हिंदी बनाम हिंदुस्तानी का विवाद अब समाप्त हो चुका है, क्योंकि संविधान की धारा 99 के अनुसार केवल दो भाषाएं हैं, अंग्रेजी और हिंदी.
The Indian Constitution in 1950 declared Hindi in Devanagari script to be the official language of the Union, and the use of English for official purposes was to cease 15 years after the Constitution came into effect, that is on 26 January 1965. The prospect of the changeover, however, led to much alarm in the non-Hindi speaking areas of India, especially in Tamil Nadu, where languages were not related to Hindi at all. As a result, Parliament enacted the Official Languages Act 1963, which provided for the continued use of Hindi for official purposes along with English even after 1965.
महोदय, मेरा मत है कि हिंदी और केवल हिंदी इस देश की राष्ट्रभाषा हो सकती है.
Sir, it's up to my friends in UP to have an undivided, unbroken whole India, or it's up to them to have only a Hindi India.
At the time, in the 1960s, when the whole anti-Hindi agitation had built up in South India, when there was an attempt to impose Hindi, solemn assurance had been given by the then Prime Minister that, Hindi would not be imposed.
The current position is that the Union government continues to use English in addition to Hindi for its official purposes as a subsidiary official language, but is also required to prepare and execute a program to progressively increase its use of Hindi. The exact extent to which and the areas in which the Union government uses Hindi and English respectively is determined by the provisions of the Constitution. The Official Languages Act 1963, the Official Languages Rule 1976.
There was, however, one thing about which we reached a fairly unanimous conclusion, that we should select one of the languages of India as the common language of the whole of India. The final decision is that we should adopt Hindi as the language for all official purposes of the Union under the Constitution.
हिंदी ने अपने पक्ष में आज तक कोई आंदोलन नहीं किया. हिंदी ने कभी नहीं कहा कि हमें लाओ, हमें लाओ, हमें लाओ. नहीं, ये संविधान के बनाने वालों का संकल्प था कि उन्होंने आज़ादी मिलने में हिंदी की भूमिका को समझा. आपस में अंग्रेजी में बात भले ही करें, लेकिन जब देश की जनता से बात करते थे तो हिंदी में करते थे, चाहे वो दक्षिण भारत के हों, चाहे वो सुदूर पूर्व के हों.
Various steps have been taken by the Indian government since then to implement the use and familiarization of Hindi extensively. Government departments have fixed rewards for employees promoting Hindi language, the amount ranging from 500 to 5,000 rupees. Apart from this, there are various other projects like through projects of Indian Council of Cultural Relations, that is ICCR, World Hindi Day celebrations, World Hindi Secretariat and Central Institute of Hindi. Annual targets are set by the Department of Official Languages regarding the amount of correspondence being carried out in Hindi. A Parliament Committee on Official Language constituted in 1976 periodically reviews the progress in the use of Hindi and submits a report to the President. The governmental body which makes policy decisions and establishes guidelines for promotion of Hindi is the Kendriya Hindi Sansthan.
All ministries have a languages department which promotes and translates documents in Hindi. Big ministries have a dedicated manpower, while smaller ministries generally outsource the work. But the biggest irony is that the officials working in these departments generally are not seen as taking a keen interest, and which is why unofficially bureaucrats positioned here see it as a punishment posting.
बाबू भैया तुम ठीक तो?
मैं छाती फोड़ा रे।
बाबू भैया तुम ठीक तो?
मार साले का खोपड़ी तोड़।
The interest in Hindi has been sustained by mass media, and at least a concerted effort has been on for the last few decades. The dialogues and songs of Bollywood films help millions of people, not only across the country but in many nooks and corners of the world, to learn spoken Hindi.
It is not because of the government intervention, but because of the films, because of the TVs, that Hindi has become more popular in our country in non-Hindi states. That way it should be pursued, and there is not any serious effort by the government to popularize Hindi in non-Hindi states.
Coffee! Garma garam coffee!
Electronic media, especially TV news and entertainment channels, are forcefully competing with the Bollywood films, and ventures like these have shown the power of Hindi.
अच्छी बनी है, पी लीजिए। कॉफी?
A rare sight when Hollywood hotties Kevin Spacey and John Travolta shook a leg with Deepika Padukone and Priyanka Chopra over the famous lungi dance at the IFA Awards. It shows nothing but the keen interest which Hindi entertainment is invoking across the world. These short films on Doordarshan sent out powerful messages in Hindi once.
हमारा बजाज बुलंद भारत की बुलंद तस्वीर.
Then came an era of golden advertisements, which catered to the middle class of yesteryears.
क्या कर रहे हो?
सब गुस्सा करते हैं, मैं घर छोड़ के जा रहा हूँ।
मगर घर में तो मम्मी ने गर्मा गर्म जलेबियाँ बनाई है।
जलेबी?
During this period, English advertising mainly was elitist. However, so much has changed since then.
Tell me why? But I'm growing, mommy.
Why is the sky blue? The sky is blue because of तारे दिन में कहाँ जाते हैं? तारे कहीं नहीं जाते। मून का शेप क्यों बदलता है? Because of the earth's shape.
Now one will find ads of premium brands in Hindi as well, again reflecting the new status of Hindi.
माँ, एक क्वेश्चन है।
अनगिनत, आसमान में अनगिनत तारे होते हैं।
वो तो मैंने कब का पूछा था। माँ ये बताओ, फरवरी में सिर्फ 28 डेज क्यों होते हैं?
According to a recent study jointly done by Internet and Mobile Association of India and IMRB International, Hindi is the second most widely preferred language after English in India.
Social networking sites are thriving because of the prevalent use of the local language. One would be surprised, but Hindi has become a popular choice on sites like Facebook or Twitter.
Google launched its translator in Hindi in 2007 and its Hindi portal in 2009. In September 2011, Twitter also launched regional content delivery in Hindi alongside Google and Facebook, offering a search engine in 9 Indian languages.
On Windows, Hindi input is available. There are tools to input Hindi characters into the computer. On Macintosh it is available. On Linux operating system it is available, as well as on Android and iOS operating systems which are used on mobile devices, it is available. So the issue is not of having these tools available. but the issue is how to popularize these tools among the general population.
Time for a short break now. On the other side, we talk about the challenges faced by Hindi as a language. Back in a moment. Every language passes through an evolutionary phase from dormant to active, and during this period, it undergoes changes in its style, format and usage. In the case of Hindi language, the journey has not been very easy.
Despite the phenomenal growth of Hindi language, there are some basic issues and problems faced by it. Being young and not developed as language of science and technology, Hindi has an uphill task to compete with English, which is normally the language of industrial and modern information technology. English is still the medium of global commerce and finance, where high-end jobs still require mastery over English. The presumption in India has been that unless kids start lisping Baba Black Sheep, they would never acquire sufficient command over English. So attempts in India to embrace the language that gives the new generation entry into the world of globalization tends to be at the expense of the local Indian languages.
बहुत से लोग कहते हैं कि सेवाओं के क्षेत्र में या सर्विस इंडस्ट्री में हमें जो एक एडवांटेज मिला हुआ है वो अंग्रेजी की वजह से मिला हुआ है, लेकिन मेरा ये पूछना है कि हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था में सेवाओं या सर्विस इंडस्ट्री का तो हिस्सा बहुत छोटा है, लेकिन हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था में कृषि एक प्रधान क्षेत्र है, हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था में विनिर्माण या मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एक बहुत बड़ा क्षेत्र है। क्या इनमें आप देखेंगे तो इनमें अंग्रेजी की ज़रूरत है क्या? तो सिर्फ एक क्षेत्र के लिए हम ये दलील देते हैं कि सर्विस इंडस्ट्री में अंग्रेजी हमारी चूँकि अच्छी है तो हमें दुनिया में प्रधानता मिलती है।
English cannot be stopped and it will have to continue till everybody is ready. Pandit Jawaharlal gave the example of people living in Northeast. Those people, if they want to say, we are now ready for the switchover, so please do that.
For Hindi, the problem also is a gradual assertion of the so-called dialects such as Bhojpuri and Maithili as languages in their own right. Bhojpuri and Maithili speakers do not want their tongue to be treated as a dialect of Hindi. The popularity of Bhojpuri films, which have carved out a space for themselves distinct from that of Hindi films, is a marker of this trend.
थोपने की बात नहीं कर रहे, हम हिंदी को थापने की बात कर रहे हैं। जैसे दीवार पे थापते हैं ना, हाथ थापते हैं या कोई अल्पना बनाते हैं। हमारा देश हमारे लोकगीतों में धड़कता है। लोकगीत किन भाषाओं में हैं, वहाँ कोई भेद नहीं होता। मैंने कितने सारे विद्यार्थियों को शोध कार्य कराया है। हरियाणवी लोकगीत, हिमाचली लोकगीत, वे सब हिंदी में आते हैं। तो हिंदी की ताकत उसकी बोलियाँ हैं, उसकी क्षेत्रीय भाषाएँ हैं। लेकिन राजनीतिक दुरभिसंधियों से हम आपस में लड़ने लगते हैं, जिसकी कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है। आपका काम राजकाज चलाना है, वो चलाइए। भाषा को जनता के लिए छोड़ दीजिए, जिस भाषा में उसको अच्छा लगता है उसमें बात करें।
There are big question marks on the origin of Hindi. Experts say that if all dialects are recognized as languages, who will constitute the chunk of Hindi speakers? Historically speaking, Hindi has evolved from the local dialects.
Critics despise the way youngsters, especially in Hindi-speaking states, feel proud, saying that they don't know Hindi, their national language. Parents have a tendency to feel inferior if their child is unable to converse in English. And then there is politics of language in different states. For example, recall this incident in the year 2009. Samajwadi Party MLA Abu Azmi was targeted by the MNS MLAs for taking oath in Hindi.
The language is a very emotional issue, and you can't impose one language on people who do not have that language as mother tongue. And you have to take people into confidence, and there must be consensus, national consensus on any language.
The core issue, however, is the growth of Hindi at home. It definitely has wide reach but does not show much sign of life in thought and content. The Indian government organizes Hindi weeks and Hindi days annually to promote its use, but such efforts have failed to achieve their stated objective. Experts say the language commissions formed post-independence have never laid stress on making Hindi easier and conversational. For example, Hindi used in the government offices and various ministries is more of a Sanskritized, purist and technical form of language. Unfortunately, this classical form of Hindi still continues to be applied as formal means of communication. Though there has been a demand from the bureaucrats to simplify it, but has not gone much headway. It's the same form of Hindi which in the initial days was used by All India Radio and Doordarshan.
की कार्यवाही को दिसंबर के पहले सप्ताह से रिकॉर्ड करके दूरदर्शन से प्रसारित किए जाने की संभावना है।
तो ये देश जो नौकरशाह चलाते हैं, ये देश जिसको ब्यूरोक्रेसी चलाती है, उसको अंग्रेजी मुफीद आती है। उसका कारण क्या है कि अंग्रेजी एक रहस्य की भाषा है। नीचे से नीचे के आदमी को उसका रहस्य पता नहीं लगेगा, क्योंकि सारी नोटिंग ड्राफ्टिंग अंग्रेजी में हो रही है और जिसके बारे में हो रही है वो हिंदी जानता है, सिर्फ हिंदी जानता है। न्याय सारा अंग्रेजी में हो रहा है और जिसके लिए न्याय आप कर रहे हैं वो गरीब आदमी है, उसको अंग्रेजी आती नहीं है। तो ये भ्रम है कि अंग्रेजी पूरे देश को आती है।
Amidst all these challenges faced by Hindi language at the global level, India has been demanding an official language status for Hindi at United Nations. The estimated cost of translation, interpretation and so forth would roughly be around $14 million. This measure would certainly boost Hindi's profile. But given how few people outside India speak Hindi, questions still remain open on that.
दुनिया की जो दूसरे नंबर की सबसे बड़ी भाषा है, उसको यूनाइटेड नेशंस में जगह मिलना तो एक स्वाभाविक बात है, लेकिन ये एक बहुत चिंताजनक मुद्दा है कि स्वयं भारत में ही हिंदी की स्थिति को लेकर समस्या है, उसको लेकर विवाद है।
India's founding fathers Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru were confident that Hindustani, which is a combination of Hindi and Urdu, would inevitably grow to become a lively contact language for entire India. But instead, the language that plays this role is the English, which is also the official medium at the UN. Like all languages, Hindi has acquired many new words, but they do not figure in its dictionaries. In the normal course, languages shed archaic words. They, however, keep a link and do not lose them permanently. A recent study suggests that on a conservative estimate, Hindi has lost over 10,000 words in the passing decade. The language has not even mourned the loss of the treasure, let alone compile them for posterity.
से हम लोग विमुख हो रहे हैं, अच्छे पठन पाठन से, किताबों से हम दूर हो रहे हैं और हम अंग्रेजी की जो प्रधानता का माहौल है उसके भी थोड़े से प्रभाव में आ रहे हैं। तो शब्दों में इस वजह से थोड़ी कमी हो रही है, लेकिन ये सोचना गलत है कि हिंदी का शब्द भंडार कम हो रहा है। हिंदी का शब्द भंडार हो सकता है कुछ शब्द हिंदी से छूट रहे हों दैनिक व्यवहार में, लेकिन अनेक नए शब्द हिंदी में आ भी रहे हैं।
Hindi certainly requires a dictionary mission as a first step towards realizing its global ambitions. If the state wants Hindi to be a powerhouse to draw its energy from, it should make the first initiative. Experts say that leaving its distribution and execution in the hands of the private players may defeat its purpose.
Home Ministry's latest directive is another attempt to popularize Hindi language, but there are many people who see it as an imposition.
It would appear that they would like all the journals, texts, all the things that are used in government, the memorandums and everything to be in Hindi. That is not something that officers are competent to handle, so they will tend to send it to the Hindi translation unit. The trouble with that is that it takes the lead time as of now is about 30-40 days for anything to come back. So there could be a lot of delay, or they would have to replenish and strengthen the Hindi departments.
There will be part of bureaucracy who will welcome it. There is a part of bureaucracy who will not welcome it. That's why the change, it is not the change itself, but the method of change that should be slow and not fast.
There are big question marks raised on the accountability of the officers of the bureaucrats who monitor the growth of Hindi language. Benchmarks which are followed are in the old 60s style. For example, a simple stock taking of as to how many dictations in Hindi have been given by a bureaucrat are considered. So the stress is on the number or the quantity and not the quality of Hindi. That perhaps is something which needs an urgent attention.
Why Hindi is still seen with contempt perhaps has got to do with the unsettling reality of metros and towns of India where people speak Hindi and understand it as well, but the Hindi vocabulary of the city-bred convent-educated youth is astonishingly poor. At the academia, Hindi has failed to become the preferred language of specialization. There are all over the world serious alarms about disappearance of languages and culture. Given the fact that Hindi has major challenges to confront, be it when it's pitted against English or when it comes face to face with local dialects which are competing for a language status.
Languages cannot be preserved by making dictionaries or grammars. Languages live if people who use them continue to live. Therefore, a micro-level planning of development is also one of the key components in the development and promotion of any language. That's all we could pack up in this half hour from our entire team. Goodbye and thanks for watching.